Good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone. I am ABC 13 news anchor Chauncey Glover. It is a pleasure to be here with you here on a Sunday evening. Thank you so much for joining us here from the campus of University of Houston here in this beautiful theater. And we have a lot of questions, and like Ms. Cynthia said, we also will be streaming live on our website at abc13.com.
Thank you very much, and welcome. I'm Arlene Guzman, Univision 45 anchor, and Noticias 45 Houston is offering simultaneous translation in Spanish on our Facebook page, also on Twitter, YouTube, and also on our website, univision45.com. Tonight, we are hosting the candidates for Texas' 7th Congressional District. We will start now. Please welcome Republican incumbent John Culberson.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And Democratic candidate Lizzie Fletcher.
All right, we want to thank our candidates for being here with us tonight. A coin flip backstage. We're going to go right ahead. John Culberson will answer the first question. Now, all answers will be approximately 2 minutes in length and with 1 minute rebuttals. I'll say that again, 2 minutes in length, approximately, and a 1 minute rebuttal. All right?
We will start with the first question. Texas Congressional District 7 was impacted by 3 major storms in the past 3 years and is still recovering. We are in the middle of hurricane season now. What is your plan for completing recovery?
Marlene, thank you. And first of all, thank you for your flexibility with the schedule tonight. I want to thank the Fletcher campaign as well. And to say that this is, I think, a good illustration that I'm the right person at the right time at the right place for Houston. As the only appropriator from Southeast Texas, I was of course, as soon as I was appointed to the Appropriations Committee, began to work with the Harris County Flood Control District to make sure we built out our entire flood control network to protect us against a 100-year storm. When Hurricane Harvey hit, and we were all of us affected in some form or fashion, family or friends or neighbors, when I was finally able to get back to Washington, I found Chairman of the full Appropriations Committee, Rodney Frelinghuysen from New Jersey, found me on the floor and he said, "John, I want you to know I remember you were the only Texas Republican that voted for Hurricane Sandy relief. When my constituents needed help, you were there for me. I'm here for you." As my subcommittee chairman, he asked me to take charge of the Hurricane Harvey recovery package. So I immediately got the Florida and Texas delegations together in a bipartisan way and organized passage of the largest hurricane recovery package in the history of the United States, $141 billion in 3 separate bills, which includes enough money to finish every federally authorized flood control project in Harris County at full federal expense. So my plan is to use this terrible tragedy as our forefathers did with the Galveston storm of 1900. As your appropriator, as your representative, I'm positioned to make sure that we repair the damage from the storm, but then build out our flood control network for the far future. That's what led to the Port of Houston's creation. When the Galveston storm wiped out the Port of Galveston, our forefathers understood we needed to build for the future. So I'm in the right place at the right time with the right skill set, working with all of my colleagues around the country and across the aisle to make sure that we have built out our city to protect against not just the next big storm, but for the far future to make sure it doesn't happen again.
Lizzie, you may answer.
Thank you. Well, I don't think this is the right place and the right time. The right time was 18 years ago after Tropical Storm Allison in 2001 when you took office, Congressman. I was your constituent. I have been for 18 years, and I remember how Tropical Storm Allison affected this community. I remember it flooded my own building downtown as well as the medical center, and the projects that the Army Corps of Engineers has identified for this community have gone unfunded for 18 years. It shouldn't take a Hurricane Harvey to get our member of Congress to act and to work to build our flooding infrastructure. We have known that flooding is a problem since 2001. We've certainly seen it in the Memorial Day storm, in the Tax Day flood. We've had chronic flooding during your entire tenure. So it's not the right place and the right time after Harvey. The right place and the right time was before Harvey. We cannot simply react to disasters. We have to be proactive. We have to look ahead at what is coming, and we have to plan for the future. And as your member of Congress, that's what I intend to do.
Thank you, Lisa.
And I have a follow-up question to this Hurricane Harvey plan question. How can these plans your plans that you've spelled out, how can your plans directly prevent future flooding damages, especially for those high-risk communities in our area?
Well, it's important to point out that what my opponent said is unfortunately just simply not true. I'm a member of the Appropriations Committee. Don't seek out television cameras. I believe in that little sign on Ronald Reagan's desk. There's no limit to what you can do. You don't mind who gets the credit. So I've worked quietly to make sure the medical center was protected after Allison. I had just been appointed to the Appropriations Committee. With 11 inches of rain, Herman Hospital had 38 feet of water in their lobby after Allison. I targeted money for the basements of the medical center to build submarine doors and waterproof them, move all the equipment and utilities upstairs. So after I did that work, with 41 inches of rain, the Herman Hospital only had a wet carpet. So I've made a dramatic difference in protecting and building out the infrastructure, not just at the medical center, but throughout the city of Houston. And in fact, Chauncey, the Sims Bayou was the only watershed that did not flood during Harvey, and that's because I got them the money they needed to protect against a 100-year storm event. The goal the flood control district aims at is building out these bayous to protect us against a 100-year storm event, and then for the homes in the area to be built to code. So since I'm as the only appropriator from Southeast Texas and have the right skill set and as a subcommittee chairman, I've been able to deliver those dollars to the flood control district. For the last 10 years, we've been unable to earmark money, so I can't give the flood control district more money than they ask for. It's not possible. But while I could target money, I did so. While I could give them more than they asked for, I did so to make sure, for example, not only Sims Bio is built out, but that we got all the money that we needed to. For example, I've gotten since 2002 $200 million for Brace Bio, and that's a pay-as-you-go project. The county incurs the bill, and then they get reimbursed. Buffalo Bio, I've got about $150 million for Buffalo. All the watersheds in Harris County have been a key part of my plan and my work on behalf of the district since I was first appointed to the committee in 2002. You just don't see my name because I don't go looking for headlines. I just try to do the job and do it quietly and do it very well.
I'm a little bit surprised by this answer for a couple of reasons. Number one, for the last several years, the Army Corps of Engineers has identified $311 million worth of projects that were not funded. They were approved, they were vetted through the process, but the Appropriations Committee did not fund them. And in fact, Congressman Al Green and Congressman Gene Green, two Democrats who are not in the majority and not on the Appropriations Committee, pushed for funding to get those projects completed. And to your question, Chauncey, how would this affect us? If Project Braze had been completed, which it was scheduled to be in 2014, then people who had less than 24 inches of water in their homes probably wouldn't have flooded in Harvey, because that's how much the water will be reduced once Project Braze is completed. But Project Braze is behind schedule, it's underfunded, and during the time that Project Braze was not completed, there were projects where more money was being appropriated than was asked for, like for the border wall. So there are ways to get extra money. I believe that we've heard several instances from the congressman of doing that. And the question is, why not for Project Braze? Why not for our flooding infrastructure that we need here?
Well, in fact, Project Braze is a... Project Braze is a reimbursement project. They cannot submit a bill to the Corps until the county's already incurred the cost. So it is built in stages by the county, and then they're reimbursed. It's different from the other flood control projects in the area. And in fact, that legislation you referred to that Congressman Green, Al Green, and Gene Green worked on, I co-authored with them. It's really, the work that I do on appropriations is probably the best illustration of bipartisanship in the Congress. We, on the Appropriations Committee, work together very, very well in a very quiet way. We're the only 12 bills that have to pass. Every other bill in Congress can die, but those 12 bills have to pass. So almost all of my work is within the body of those appropriations bills, and my name doesn't appear anywhere. But I co-authored that legislation with Congressman Al Green and Gene Green. to attempt to designate some additional funding, but it was prohibited under House rules because earmarks are banned. They have been for the last 10 years. I'm working to try to change that. I'm working to try to change the rules so I can target money for flood control projects that are requested by state or local authorities. If it goes through the entire legislative process with your name on it as your representative, I should be able to make sure that money is spent on a state or local project requested by local authorities.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Culberson.
All right, next question. We did some research and we found that 75% of voters over the age of 50 believe that Social Security is important for financial security in retirement. How do you plan to strengthen this program so retirees receive the appropriate benefits they deserve?
Start with me.
Mr. Culberson.
Social Security is, if you are under the age of 45, Social Security cannot pay the benefits that it's promised. If you're over the age of 45, you're fine. The Medicare program also is a concern, Chauncey, because if you're under the age of 54, the Medicare hospital fund can only pay about 50 cents on the dollar. That's where the Ways and Means Committee, which is led by Kevin Brady, is well positioned to deal with this. On the Appropriations Committee, we fund the annual operations of the government. Social Security and Medicare are not a part of the jurisdiction of our committee, but Kevin Brady and the Ways and Means Committee have a plan that they're going to have a whole series of hearings on to make sure that Social Security is there for people under the age of 45. But everyone who is over the age of 45 should have no concern about Social Security. It's there for them. It will pay the benefits promised. If you're over the age of 54, Medicare is there for you, and you shouldn't be concerned about it. But this is the principal source of the debt and the deficit, which is, to my mind, one of the greatest concerns that I've got. First bill I signed as your representative on the first day of Congress is a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff has said the greatest strategic threat to the United States is the debt and the deficit. And I think it's essential that we have a balanced budget amendment to the United States Constitution, just as we do in taxes, to force the Congress to deal with these tremendous programs that that eat up about 67 cents out of every federal dollar. But the Social Security, again, for those who are under the age of 45, that's the concern. If you're over 45, you're in good shape.
Thanks, Chauncey. I think the answer to your question is the 75% of voters that told you they're very concerned about relying on Social Security and Medicare need to be worried. We've just heard it from Congressman Culberson that if you're under 45, you can't count on Social Security and Medicare, even though, like me, I'm under 45. I've been paying. It's been coming out of my paycheck for 20 years. But what we're hearing is those benefits may not be available to those of us who are paying into the system now. And we heard just this week Senator Mitch McConnell tell us that because of the tax cut that the GOP passed through Congress last year, that the first thing he's looking at doing after this election is cutting Social Security and Medicare. That's the first thing they're going to do because, of course, the tax cut last year increased the deficit. Despite what you're saying, Congressman, you voted for legislation that increased the deficit. You've voted to increase spending and reduced the income coming in. And so we have an even bigger deficit. The deficit is projected to be $2 trillion, $1.9 trillion over 10 years is added to the national debt. Deficit spending is increasing to the largest rate it has. It's the 5th highest on record in our history. What we need is a Congress that takes seriously the promises that we've made to seniors, to people who have earned these benefits and paid into this system. And we have got to protect Social Security and Medicare.
Thank you.
All right, we want to talk about health care and insurance right now. John Culberson, your opponent, has said that you voted to let insurance companies discriminate against people with pre-existing conditions. Is this true?
No, again, unfortunately, that's just simply not true. I'm a co-author of legislation guaranteeing that people with pre-existing conditions are protected. It's the Pre-Existing Condition Protection Act. The alternative that we proposed for Obamacare to replace it included guaranteed coverage for people with pre-existing conditions. This is very personal to me. My brother is just recovering from stage 4 throat cancer. I want to be sure that my brother's got access to insurance, that all of us do. If you've got a pre-existing condition, you shouldn't be concerned at all, because when we are finally able to repeal and replace a failure that Obamacare is, we'll have legislation as a part of it to make sure that there's a way for states to, for example, create a high-risk pool to guarantee coverage at an affordable rate for people with pre-existing conditions. Much of what you're hearing is just simply not accurate about the replacement plan that we put together. Our alternative that we put forward is as a free market, constitutional conservative. I want to see us, moving forward, create a system where consumers are in charge of what type of health insurance they buy. I've supported, as a replacement, a plan that would allow, make sure that insurance is affordable, portable, and accessible, to allow consumers to purchase insurance across state lines, to shop and buy a policy in Montana or Oklahoma if they choose, to buy a product that fits their needs at a price they can afford, that's got the type of coverage they need for whatever fits their family. We have, as a part of our plan, also allowed small businesses to pool together to negotiate lower rates so that they can essentially negotiate with the big insurance companies as though they were ExxonMobil, for example. But above all, our plan is designed to make sure that the doctor-patient relationship is sacred. It's a terrible idea to have the government in between a patient and their doctor. I know personally what a failure Obamacare is. I'm on Obamacare. Members of Congress are all under Obamacare. My premiums have gone up 500%, and my deductible has gone up 400%. So I know what a failure it is, and we need to get the government out of the business of health care and put the consumer and doctors back in charge of it in a free market where people have choices about what they want to buy for a coverage.
Thank you, Mr. Congressman. Lacey Fletcher.
I think what you've heard is simply not accurate. The American Health Care Act, which the Congressman referenced and voted for, may have nominally contained a provision that would allow you to maintain coverage for pre-existing conditions, but only if there's no gap in your insurance in 67 days, and only for this short-term period, and only there was no prohibition on what the cost could be. So if your insurance can charge you 20 times more for insurance that you can't afford, it's not really available to you. If your monthly insurance premium is $15,000 or $20,000, that's not available to you. But I want to talk about one of the things that the Congressman said to you about the government getting involved between the patient and doctor relationship. Because I think it's ironic that nearly 50,000 women in this community rely on Planned Parenthood for their primary health care needs. For most women, it's the only time they go to a doctor in a year. And Congressman Culberson has voted 16 times to defund Planned Parenthood to prevent women from having access to the care of their choice.
And I have another question for you. There have been claims that you support single-payer health care, a plan that could get an estimated 200 million Americans kicked off their private insurance plans. Is this claim true?
No, the claim is not true, and I'm so glad that you asked, because I've seen it on TV. I just got it in the mail on a flyer from Congressman Culberson, and it has his name on it. And it's shocking to me to see this claim repeated because, of course, this was a big issue in the Democratic primary. And the candidates in the Democratic primary differed on what was the right answer. And there were several advocating for single payer, and I was not. And it is interesting to me that they cite the debate where I said I didn't support it because there was no way to pay for it, and yet somehow you, Congressman, have authorized ads on TV saying the exact opposite of what I've said. It's one of the things that frustrates voters so much that they can't rely on anything they're hearing. And what I've said I've supported since day one is shoring up our healthcare system. The Affordable Care Act, we know, is not perfect. We know that there is work to be done, and it's the number one thing I hear from voters across District 7. I've been on the campaign trail for a year and a half now, and the number one thing people tell me is that they are concerned about access to and affordability of health care. They want to make sure that their pre-existing conditions are covered. They want to make sure that we can make lower prices for prescription drugs, and that is there any way the government can help? And of course the answer is yes. We could let Medicare negotiate the price of prescription drugs just like the VA does, but Congressman Culberson's voted against it. He voted against Medicare Part D in the first place. And so there are a lot of things that we need to do. And if we look back at the Affordable Care Act, of course it's not perfect, but instead of trying to undo it, with no plan in place to actually bring the relief that people want. What we need to do is look at the fundamental basis and the essential compromise that it was between individuals who want coverage, between insurers who are providing the coverage that need people to buy in to cover the pre-existing conditions, and the government that's supposed to subsidize the expansion of health care and help people get covered through the exchanges,
Thank you very
expansion of Medicaid. Those are the things we need to do.
All right, let's move forward. And we have another question also about healthcare. Houston is the home to the Texas Medical Center, which is the largest medical complex in the world. Still, many don't have access to quality healthcare or can't afford the premium prices. How do you plan to address the healthcare needs of Houstonians?
This is why I've been such a strong supporter for the community health centers around the country, and particularly here in the city of Houston. On the Appropriations Committee, made sure that the community health centers would provide essential health services to people that might not otherwise have access to it because they couldn't afford it, that they're fully funded, and that that service is available in underserved areas in particular. I have no problem with Planned Parenthood providing health care services. Planned Parenthood's created their own problem because for over 30 years, the federal law under the Hyde Amendment has strictly prohibited using tax dollars to perform abortions. And all Planned Parenthood has to do is separate their operations. If they insist on continuing to provide abortions, they need to do it in a separate entity that doesn't use tax dollars at all. And then all their health care services do that in a completely separate place, and they would be eligible to receive federal funding. But federal law has been clear. You cannot use tax dollars to perform abortions, and Planned Parenthood can solve their own problem. So I've also made sure that I've invested not only in the community health centers, but to provide help for making sure that the federal government provides sufficient funding for the Medicaid program for states to make their own decisions about how large a population they can serve, for example, for Medicaid. So I've been a strong supporter also of reimportation of drugs to allow consumers to buy their prescription medicine from overseas, because I think all of us as consumers are intelligent enough to make those decisions on our own. I'm one of the few Republicans that has voted to allow consumers to buy their drugs overseas from Canada, for example. That will dramatically bring down the cost of medication. Competition works. These are common sense, fundamental, I think empirically evident facts that when you cut taxes, the economy grows. That's why I was proud to support the tax cut. If you give people choices to use their own money and make their own decisions, they're going to make better decisions, and that's going to bring costs down, and that's why I'm a free market constitutional conservative.
Two things in response. I think the first question was about essential care, and it's important to note that that's one of the guarantees of the Affordable Care Act, is that there are 10 kinds of essential care that are covered. These are the kinds of things that people are terrified of losing, the kinds of things that aren't covered in these short-term emergency plans that the Republican Congress is trying to push. And it's also the kind of thing that people say, I don't want to lose these benefits that I've gotten under the Affordable Care Act. So we need to fix the Affordable Care Act and move forward, but we need to do so in a way that preserves the things that people are so worried about losing. Now, on Planned Parenthood, we're talking about Title X family planning funding. And for those who don't know, Title X was born in TX-07. George H.W. Bush, when he was the congressman for this district, introduced the Title X family planning program funding. And the funds that we're talking about, that you have asked HHS to stop providing to Planned Parenthood, are fee-for-service reimbursements, gynecological care, for pap smears, for breast exams, for cervical cancer exams, for family planning. We're not talking about abortion. Everybody knows about the Hyde Amendment.
Thank you,
Everybody
Lucy.
knows that that is not what these votes are for.
Thank you.
And
We
I
have
think
to
it's
continue.
disingenuous to tell everyone in this room that we're talking about
Thank you.
implementing Title X.
Mr. Culberson, do you have anything in response to that?
Yeah, I would point out that George H.W. Bush is pro-life, as I am. George H.W. Bush, as I am, believes in the sanctity of human life, but I also support the three exceptions for cases of rape, incest, or the life of the mother. And Planned Parenthood can solve their own problem simply by segregating their operations, because it's been the law for 30 years that we cannot use tax dollars to fund abortions. And where those operations are commingled, that makes it essentially Planned Parenthood ineligible to receive federal funding. But that's also why I've supported community health centers, to make sure that I'm investing in the National Institute of Health and the National Cancer Institute research that they're doing, that revolutionary research to cure not only breast cancer and cervical cancer, but all types of cancer, using the work that's being done at MD Anderson by the scientists there is extraordinary, and I'm very proud to be a strong supporter of record increases in funding for the National Institute of Health, for cancer research, and for these great institutions like MD Anderson.
Sticking with healthcare, retail prices for prescription drugs continue to rise. What will you do to negotiate pricing on these prescription drugs?
Who do you want to go first on this?
You can go, Ms. Fletcher.
Okay, sure. Well, so there are a couple of things, and I've talked about it. You've probably seen my commercial on this. One thing is so easy, which is to just allow Medicare to negotiate the price of prescription drugs, to use the buying power that Medicare has to negotiate the price of prescription drugs. And if you think about it, that's what Medicare should do, because we as the taxpayers are paying the bill for those prescriptions. And the government has the obligation to get the best possible price so that we can hang on to as much of those dollars so that we can continue to use them to pay for other expenses, other Medicare-related expenses. The Veterans Administration has the right to negotiate, and that is one of the essential things that we can do right away. We don't have to wait to do this, but Congress has voted against it. But there are other things we can do as well, like requiring more transparency, like allowing different groups and organizations to bring generic drugs to the market more quickly. There are a lot of barriers to entry for manufacturers who are trying to bring generic drugs to the market. And I actually had a great conversation just the other day with some folks at MD Anderson who are gathering together with other hospitals to try to create a nonprofit that will manufacture generic drugs, because there are too many risks. And we've seen it. We've seen it with EpiPens. We've seen it with other important medication. There are too many possibilities for those prices to get manipulated and for people to be priced out of the essential medicine that they need. So there are a lot of things that the government can and should do to make sure that we are keeping down the cost of prescription drugs. It is the number one thing I hear from seniors. It's also something I hear from so many residents across the district who are physicians. We have a lot of physicians that work in the medical center, even though the medical center is no longer part of the district. And they say they're concerned because their patients can't follow their care guidance. They can't afford their prescriptions, and they're choosing between dinner and taking their medicine. That's not a choice that any American should make, and certainly not our senior citizens. So we have to do everything we can to bring those prices down.
Thank you, Ms. Fletcher.
The very best way to bring down the price of any product is competition. The best way to bring down the price and improve the quality of any product is competition, to let consumers make those decisions on their own. That's why I've been a strong supporter in Congress and will continue to work to allow individual Americans to purchase their prescription drugs on the internet. In other countries, it's called reimportation, something the drug companies strongly oppose and fought me on. I'm one of the Republicans in Congress that's voted repeatedly to allow for reimportation so that you could buy your drugs from Canada or any other country you think can provide the products you need at a price you can afford. It's something that makes good sense. And I've also believed very strongly that if on any problem, instinctively, I will always vote to cut taxes, to free up the marketplace, to let you control your money in the way that you know best, because no one's going to be a better steward of your money, your health, your property than you are. I want to get the government out of our lives, out of our way, and out of our pockets so we can continue to let Texans run Texas and thrive as we have so well over the
Thank you, Mr. Kovish.
over the last few years.
Moving on to another important topic. In 2010, the greater Houston area grew by more than 1.2 million people. With the Houston population still growing, how do you plan to improve roads and expand transportation?
This is another good example of I'm the right person at the right place at the right time, because I work very quietly in a cooperative way with my colleagues across the aisle and across the city of Houston and across the state to make sure that we've got the transportation dollars we need here in Houston. I always try to think outside of the box, and I make sure that every year that when, for example, Houston Metro, which is an essential part of the equation, has submitted requests to Congress for bus service, for transit centers, I work with my colleagues, Gene Green, Al Green, Congressman Jackson Lee, Congressman Call and Poe, to make sure that Metro receives the funding they need for their bus service, for their transit centers, for their commuter lanes. I have supported funding for the rail lines that the voters approved in 2003. In Gene Green and Sheila Jackson Lee's district, the north and southeast lines were approved by the voters. So when those requests came into the Appropriations Committee, the voters approved them. I always keep my word, and I've supported funding for those rail lines because the voters approved them. The rail lines that were not on the ballot and were not approved and are in my district and have strong opposition, I don't support those because those are in my district, and I will always stand up to protect the quality of life of the people in my district. That's my job description as representative, and I always keep my word to my constituents. That's one thing they know is certainty. I also try to think outside the box, and building commuter bus lanes, for example, out to the far suburbs is something that I strongly support. I figured out a way, when I was first elected, my first promise to the district was to expand the Katy Freeway as fast as humanly possible, and I kept that promise and did so in record time without any additional federal money by getting the Federal Highway Administration to approve the local Harris County Toll Road Authority coming in and opening up those additional toll lanes. So I think toll lanes, commuter bus, additional bus service, supporting Metro and the work that they do to help serve parts of the city that might not otherwise have access to transit is an important part of that. And I've done that repeatedly over the years in a bipartisan way with my colleagues from across the Houston area.
Thank you.
I think the record shows otherwise. And I think it's ironic to hear you say, let Texans run Texas. But the obvious question is, why won't you let Metro run Metro? Because the record shows that you have worked against Metro at every turn throughout your tenure, and essentially put a reverse earmark in every appropriations bill, preventing Metro from getting federal transit dollars, requiring an audit that no other transportation agency in the country is required to perform, an audit that Metro passed with flying colors, by the way, an audit that Metro actually put out once it happened, and had blocked transportation dollars coming to Houston. Our tax money is going to Dallas to pay for light rail and to pay for expanded transit options that we don't have here and that the people who live here desperately want. Alternative. It's not just about freeways and highways and cars. People are looking for alternatives, and in not letting Metro provide those alternatives, we are getting in the way of our growth, and we are putting our city years behind other cities.
Fletcher. Thank you. Do you have a response, Mr. Patterson?
Well, unfortunately, again, that's just simply not true. The only thing I've asked Metro to do is tell us on the ballot. Ask the voters for permission. Tell us on the ballot what you're going to build, where you're going to build it, and how much it's going to cost. That's perfectly reasonable for some of the largest capital investments we will make as taxpayers. Voters approved a rail line on West Park, not Richmond. As soon as that election was over, Metro did a bait and switch and switched it from West Park to Richmond. I talked to my constituents on Richmond who viscerally opposed that line that would destroy that street. They also wanted to build it right down the middle of Post Oak. My job description is representative. I take it very seriously. I keep my word. And I will always stand up to protect the quality of life of the constituents in my district who do not want these two rail lines that the voters did not approve and that Metro cannot afford. Those are the only two lines that I blocked. The rest of it, all Metro, anything that was on the ballot, the voters approved, I was happy to support. But it's just simply not true, and a misrepresentation of my position. I will, again, always keep my word to protect the quality of life of my constituents anywhere and anytime they need me.
Ms. Fletcher, for the next question, you can start by answering. So right now in District 7, there's an estimated 22,000 people who are unemployed right now. What are your plans to strengthen the economy and to create more jobs for these people?
Well, I think it's important to note that as strong as the economy is, there are people who are being left behind. And even more than the 22,000 people who are unemployed, there are a whole lot of people who are employed in 2 and 3 jobs because they can't earn a living wage. Now, I think that it is essential that we provide every opportunity that we can for people to find meaningful work and get paid appropriately. I believe that we need to ensure that women get paid the same as men doing the same job, something that Mr. Culberson has voted against. I think it's important that we talk about having a living wage for everyone in our community. Again, something that Mr. Culberson has voted against, increasing the minimum wage across the country repeatedly, and has sponsored national right-to-work legislation. But beyond that, we need to look at the avenues and the ways that people create jobs and the ways that people can connect with jobs that are meaningful and rewarding for them. We need to improve our education system and make sure that students who are graduating from college aren't graduating with crushing debt that keeps them from being able to make ends meet. We need to make sure that we're emphasizing training programs. There are all kinds of apprenticeship and training programs that can help people earn higher wages, but we need to help them connect with them. And another thing that's vitally important, we need to have transportation options for people to get to work. And one of the critical issues that Metro has raised time and again is being able to move people across important corridors, getting people to and from the airport, but getting people west of downtown to the uptown area. And when we just heard about blocking those federal transit dollars, I think it's ironic because I got a flyer hanging on my door that says that John Culberson ensured that no federal dollars came to Houston for Metro. That is on a flyer. I have it in my office. I'm happy to bring it and make it available. But I think that transportation matters, people having access to good jobs matters, being able to get there and keep their jobs matters. So we've got to make sure that we're moving our whole city forward and that we are doing things that help all of us succeed.
Mr. Culberson.
Well, the reason the Houston and Texas economy are so strong is because we're following common sense, fiscally conservative policies. We understand as Republicans, as fiscal conservatives, that if you cut taxes, it's going to create jobs. I was proud to support the largest tax cut in the history of the United States, and it has created record job growth. As a result of the tax cut, as a result of the deregulation that we've passed in Congress that has unleashed the American economy, the World Economic Forum just last week named the U.S. economy the most competitive in the world. The Texas economy continues to thunder and grow because of low taxes and a light regulatory touch. And I will always support tax cuts, and whereas my opponent has said that she would have opposed that tax cut, and in fact the first thing the Democrat Congress would pursue would be to reverse that tax cut and raise taxes on the entire country, which would be a disaster. The best way to create jobs and grow the economy is to cut taxes and unleash the free market potential of Texas workers.
Thank you.
So I'm not sure where the idea that the first thing that the Democratic Congress would do is reverse the tax cut. I haven't heard anyone say that. In fact, I signed a letter last week saying the first thing that we need to do when we are elected to Congress is address corruption in Congress, address campaign finance, and we need to make sure that we are bringing ethics reform to Congress, because what we have seen, especially in the last 2 years, is that we're not draining the swamp, we are growing the swamp. And we need to deal with campaign finance reform. We need to make sure that American citizens have a voice in our elections and in our government, that our representatives represent the people that vote for them and the people who live in their districts rather than special interests or their parties. And we need to make sure that we are passing laws so that congressmen are there and congresswomen are there to do the work of governing, not to be passing stock tips or having any other kinds of things on the floor of the House. We need to be making sure that our members of Congress are there working. The American people right now do not trust that that's happening in Congress, and we need to make sure as our first order of business that we restore our faith in our democracy.
Thank you, Ms. Fletcher.
Mr. Culberson, do you have something to add?
Certainly. Nancy Pelosi has said repeatedly if she's elected Speaker, the first thing on the top of their agenda is going to be to repeal the tax cuts, to roll back the regulatory relief that we, the Republican Congress, have been able to pass on to the business community. We have also, for example, expanded American oil and gas exploration, something the Democrats oppose strenuously. Democrats even offered an amendment last month that would have stopped the transportation of domestic oil through any pipeline that used eminent domain to be built. That would shut down the transportation of all oil in the United States. We see this repeatedly from Nancy Pelosi and her supporters in Congress, and it just defies common sense. I was very proud to help support the repeal of the oil export ban that has allowed us to expand production of domestic oil and gas to such an extent that America is now going to be energy independent. The Permian Basin, all by itself, is going to become the second largest producer of oil and gas, passing Saudi Arabia. And that's because of the free market, fiscally conservative policies that you've seen us pass in the Republican Congress and that they've promised to roll back.
Thank you, Mr. Culberson. That's your time. Mr. Culberson, we'll start with you on this one. What is your position on DACA, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals? Do you believe that there should be a pathway to citizenship?
Who do you want to go first?
Sorry.
I have already passed legislation in the Appropriations Committee with my colleagues to make sure that none of these kids that were brought here when they were very, very young are going to be deported. None of them should have to worry about being deported. If they came here when they're kids with their parents, they're not in control of that. That's not anything we should punish those kids for. So I think it's important that they feel safe if they stay out of trouble, if they stay out of gangs, if they're working, if they're in school, earning good grades. They shouldn't have to worry about it. And I voted, co-authored legislation to do so, and to make sure at the same time, however, that we are not separating kids from their parents. I've also passed legislation as an amendment in the Appropriations Committee to keep families together if they were apprehended entering the country illegally. But border security is a fundamental part of the work that I do on your behalf as Congressman. I chair the subcommittee that funds federal law enforcement. So I made sure that I've sent hundreds of additional immigration judges to the southern border, sent new prosecutors, new U.S. Marshals, new support personnel, detention beds, because immigration is first and foremost a law enforcement issue that requires enforcing existing law, to trust the officers in the field, trust their good hearts, their discerning eyes, and make sure that the people who want to enter the United States illegally know that if they do so, they will be apprehended, they're going to be prosecuted, and therefore come to the United States legally. We welcome you. We're a nation of immigrants. It's the strength of our nation. E pluribus unum means from many one. But when you come here, do so legally. Come through the ports of entry if you're seeking asylum. These are the types of bills that I've supported and will continue to support to demonstrate that it isn't worth your time or trouble to come here illegally. Do it legally. If you want asylum, do it at a port of entry. Come to the United States, become a productive citizen. We'd love to have you be a neighbor, a friend. That's what's made the country great. But above all, that we are a nation of laws, and the law must be enforced. That's the foundation of our Constitution, and it's a public safety issue as well, quite frankly.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I want to make sure I understood you correctly, Congressman, that you now support passage of a DREAM Act for childhood arrivals.
No, I said very clearly these kids should not be deported, and that's important, and that's the legislation I've co-authored and passed in the Appropriations Committee and
Sorry, I have to interrupt. You're not allowed to ask the candidate
okay.
another question.
Well, it was and I guess it was not actually that Congressman Culberson is willing to pass the DREAM Act, because that would have been the first time that I had heard it. The truth is that this Congress has done everything it can to get in the way of solving our immigration issues. And we have serious immigration issues. We need comprehensive immigration reform. We need to pass a DREAM Act, and we need to address this issue. The Senate in 2013 passed bipartisan legislation by a large margin dealing with border security, creating a pathway to citizenship, and dealing with all of the people who are in our country who came illegally. We need to address this problem, and it is a clear example of where the House of Representatives specifically has failed us by refusing even to take it up.
Thank you, Ms. Fletcher. All right, continuing on immigration. We're going to continue on immigration. How do you plan to strengthen our border security and keep out criminals?
It really is a... Oh, excuse me. Do you want to...
Yes, with you, please.
All right. Thank you. It is first and foremost a law enforcement issue. Law enforcement works, particularly if you trust the good hearts and the good instincts of our men and women in uniform on the border to distinguish between a gang member smuggling guns or drugs or humans and someone who's coming in as an economic migrant, for example. It is an essential part of our job as elected officials to protect the public safety as well, to keep dangerous criminals out of the country. We have to secure the border and do so in a way that just simply by using existing law And that's what as the chairman of the subcommittee that funds law enforcement, I've sent enough resources to the southern border so we can hire the judges, the support personnel, the marshals, have the detention space we need to enforce the law, but then also to make sure that interior enforcement has to be done as well. Employers have to use the E-Verify system to confirm that they're actually hiring someone who's in the country legally. We have to make sure that all of those existing laws are enforced, and then and only then could we actually create a guest worker program, which we really need. For the free flow of people and goods back and forth across that border to occur, the law has to be enforced, the border has to be secured. But it's a terrible message, and this is a dramatic difference between my opponent and I. And she has said in a debate this spring that she wanted to legalize everybody who's here. You just simply can't do that. Our social safety net cannot support it. It's wrong to all the people who have waited so patiently in line and followed the law. Let's enforce the law and rely on the good hearts and the good sense of our law enforcement officers to make sure the border is secure, and then pass a guest worker program that would allow people to come to the United States to work in a specific industry, which is something essential. We all know in Houston, and we in Texas in particular, as Texicans, as we were known originally, how important that relationship is with Mexico. But that free trade in goods and people requires the border be secure and the law enforced first.
Thank you.
So, of course, border security is important, and that's why it's part of the comprehensive bipartisan immigration plan that has been stalled in the House of Representatives for the last 5 years that addresses these issues. But the important thing, first of all, I did not say that we should make everyone legal who is here, but we do have a concern here about people who are in the country who are undocumented. The estimates are that in Houston, 1 in 10 people who live here is an undocumented immigrant. The impact to our economy, the impact to our society by deporting everyone who is here who is undocumented doesn't seem like the right answer for this community. It is not what this community wants and is asking for. Does that mean we should make violent criminals citizens? Of course not. And I've never said that, even though that's what your ads say. I've never advocated for that. But we need to look at where we are. We have problems with our legal immigration system, people who are waiting too long, people who are waiting decades, who are going through the process. We want to make that process fair. We have to deal with our policy overall of how people can get here. Is the family visas enough? Are the work visas enough? Those are the things that we have to do in a comprehensive manner to make sure that we are having the best possible immigration system that we can.
Thank you. Next question. Do you support the president's plan to build a wall along the U.S.-Mexico border?
I would trust the individual border sector chiefs in each sector to tell us what works best in that area. A wall makes sense in parts of the United States west of El Paso, for example, in that wide open desert. I think it is it's just an inescapable fact that you're going to need some sort of a physical barrier in parts of Arizona and New Mexico. It doesn't make sense so much along the Rio Grande River. And that's why I've encouraged the president and the administration to look to the sector chief in the Rio Grande Valley, for example, the sector chief in Laredo, the sector chief in Del Rio, the sector chief in Presidio, and in El Paso, to make a recommendation on what type of security works best for that sector. It's going to take a combination of things. First and foremost are additional law enforcement officers with the support they need from prosecutors. And it's going to take some technology. It's going to require drones and electronic surveillance. And it's going to require the assurance that if you sneak into the country illegally, if you come in to break our laws, you're going to be apprehended and detained, and there's going to be a consequence for it. That's the only way to enforce the law. But the wall only makes sense, I think, perhaps out in the far western parts of the United States. I think along the Rio Grande River to ensure access for animals and to get to water for farmers to reach the river. It may require weir dams that will dam the water up, and that's again why you have to trust the local sector chiefs. I've spent a lot of time working on this. I understand the scale of the problem and what needs to be done to address it. In fact, I even, to get a better handle on it, went in and worked in a federal court, Judge Alia Moses' courtroom for a couple of days, and with her permission, under an assumed name, so I could see what was really happening and learn, because I'm responsible for funding the U.S. Attorney's Office, and if I go down there and they know I'm coming, I get a big dog and pony show. I wanted to see what was actually happening. And I confirmed that what we need is to enforce existing law.
Thank you, Mr. Culberson. Ms. Fletcher.
So the answer to your question is no, I do not support the president's border wall. I think it is fiscally irresponsible and a waste of our very limited resources. To hear the president talk about the big, beautiful wall that he wants, that is a monument that we have already spent tens of millions of dollars building prototypes and authorizing, I think that that is not a smart use of our resources. And we need to be smart about what we're doing. It means smart investments in technology. There are sections of the border where there is already an existing wall or existing fencing. That may need to be repaired, that may need to be shored up, but you do need to look along the border. And there are a lot of border communities that don't want a wall, where the wall would be in the middle of the Rio Grande River, where the government would be taking over private property. But any dissent against the wall from Congressman Culberson has not been apparent in his words or his actions in overfunding the border wall and giving more than the president requested for the border wall, or in any vocal or a disagreement with him that any of us can hear. And right now, a lot of people in this community want to hear someone standing up for our community and for our values against what we are seeing time and again, the president attacking our community and our values and our desire to have responsible immigration policy and enforcement.
And Ms. Fletcher, we'll start with you answering this next question. Turning now to gun violence, and sadly we've witnessed this in our own area here recently as the Santa Fe High School shooting. So we've seen the devastation that can happen when guns get into the wrong hands. How do you plan to put an end to gun violence?
Well, thanks for the question. There are a lot of ways that we can work to put an end to gun violence. And fortunately, there are a lot of members of our community and across the country who are committed to doing that and who have been vocal advocates trying to do that. I've been working closely since I launched this campaign with Moms Demand Action, who've been changing the conversation about gun violence and talking about some of the very obvious things, common sense solutions that the majority of Americans agree on and the majority of people who live in this district agree on. Improving the background check system, making sure that everyone has a background check and that we close the gun show loophole. And it makes sense to make sure that guns are out of the hands of domestic abusers. We know that women are much more likely to die or be injured from gun violence from intimate partners. And we know that there are loopholes as well to prevent to enable abusers to have guns. In addition, there are all sorts of things that we can do. Opposing bad legislation, like the Hearing Protection Act that Congressman Culberson has supported in Congress, that would regulate and permit silencers on guns. That's not smart. That's not common sense. If you talk to law enforcement, they will tell you that when there is a shooting, the best thing they can do is hear where the gunshots are coming from so they can try to find the shooter. And this isn't a hypothetical issue. We've had 2 mass shootings in this district in the last couple of years. One on Memorial Drive on Memorial Day and one on Wesleyan 6 months later. And those 2 shootings injured multiple people who live in our community. And it's essential that we hear their voices and that we do things to try to make sure that they are safer. We can't eliminate all gun violence, but we can work hard to reduce it with common sense solutions that the majority of Americans agree on. But too many people are not listening to their constituents. They are beholden to the gun lobby, and they are advocating for legislation that the gun manufacturers who sell firearms want advanced, rather than the common sense things that will keep us safer.
Thank you, Ms.
Thank you. My favorite founding father, Thomas Jefferson, liked to say, if you just apply the Constitution and follow the law and apply it to any problem, no matter how complex, the Gordian knot will untie itself. And on this emotional and very difficult issue, because it is heartbreaking for all of us to see the suffering and the injuries as a parent, it's incomprehensible for me to imagine what those parents went through. And that's why I have already passed legislation to strengthen and improve existing law. With Senator Cornyn's help, with my colleague from Laredo, Henry Cuellar, we passed legislation to fix the instant background check database. We've already done that. That's been passed in the last Congress and signed into law, that if the federal agencies have to keep that database current, had that law been in effect, the Sutherland Springs shooter would not have been able to purchase a gun because he had domestic violence convictions. The laws are already there to keep the hands out of people who have a criminal record, who are mentally incompetent. We just need to enforce those laws, and I've already done that in a bipartisan way by passing legislation to deal with this problem.
All right, so at this time, our candidates will be able to ask each other one question. Okay, Ms. Fletcher, we'll start with you. This is your opportunity to ask Mr. Culberson a question.
Okay. Mr. Culberson, this week, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell told Bloomberg News that earned benefits like Social Security and Medicare would have to be cut to offset the deficit spending created by the GOP tax bill last year. Is that your position, and how do you square it with your past statements that the tax cut would not increase deficits?
Well, I have always and will continue to oppose any effort to reduce Social Security benefits. That's a sacred promise the government made to every American who paid into that system. And there is no way any such legislation would pass the House. It's certainly something I would strenuously oppose, any effort to reduce not only Social Security benefits, but Medicare benefits. Those programs can be made solvent. The Ways and Means Committee is well equipped to deal with this. They've already promised to hold a whole series of hearings and look at a variety of solutions to help ensure the long-term solvency of both Social Security and Medicare while preserving benefits that were promised to people who paid into those systems, and while making sure that not only are benefits not cut, but the program is there for the future, for our kids. That's the principal driver of the debt and the deficit, something I am deeply concerned about, and why I always co-author a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution. These two programs are an essential part of the social safety net that has got to be there for people not only who have paid into these systems and expect to receive the benefit they've paid for, but the government has an obligation to provide a social safety net for people who are poor and who need assistance. We've just got to make sure it's financially solvent. So no, I would strongly oppose any effort, always have, always will oppose any effort to cut Social Security or Medicare benefits.
Thank you, Mr. Culberson. And now is your opportunity to ask a question to Ms. Fletcher.
As important as NASA is to the Houston economy, to the U.S. economy, I chair the subcommittee that funds not only federal law enforcement, but also I'm responsible for funding the National Science Foundation, NASA, and the Department of Commerce. And I've recognized for years that NASA had too much on its plate and not enough money to do it. So I've quietly made sure that NASA's got the money they need to launch an American astronaut on an American rocket from American soil in the next 12 months. So I've got NASA back on track to restore NASA so they can do everything they need to do. But you've been critical of my work in support of NASA, and I wonder what you would do differently from the way I've handled increasing NASA funding so they can do their job, knowing how vital they are to Houston and to the national economy.
Well, I think that, I don't know that I would say that I've been critical of work supporting NASA, but I do believe that your primary responsibility is to listen to your constituents here in Houston, and I believe that as your member of Congress, that is my primary priority, to be a partner and an advocate for the people who live in this community. And NASA is certainly a part of it, but there are a lot of reports out there that supporting NASA doesn't actually support Houston and the Johnson Space Center, and that there's a lot of work that we can and should have done in supporting NASA to ensure that that work comes back to this community. Beyond that, I have been critical of the $680 million that you procured for a telescope in South America when Project Braze was underfunded, incomplete, when it was a $550 million project that the city of Houston had to borrow money to try to pay for because people are flooded out of their homes 2 and 3 times. And instead, we're sending $680 million to Chile, more than was asked for by the National Science Foundation, $76 million more, let me finish, more than we asked for, when the city of Houston had to borrow $47 million to try and complete Project Braze. So I am critical of investments that are not investments that are helping the people here in our community and are not helping people here on Earth. We're worried not about water on the moons of Europa, we're worried about water in our living rooms. And our congressmen should be listening to us and should be participating with us, supporting NASA, making sure that NASA continues to do important work right here in Houston, and bringing those projects to the Johnson Space Center is great. I really wish you could have gotten us a space shuttle. I don't understand how we didn't get a space shuttle after all of those years when they were awarded elsewhere. I wish we could have gotten that. I've been to NASA. I appreciate it, and I grew up in Space City. And growing up here, I was proud to be from Space City and the home of so many things that are important here. But I think it's essential that we pay attention to the needs of the people in our community, and what they're asking for is relief from flooding.
Thank you. Thank you. Now it is time for our closing statements. Mr. Culberson, a coin flip determined you will offer the first closing statement. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you very much. A good friend of mine, the oceanographer and explorer Bob Ballard, said that you know you've discovered your purpose in life when you want to run to work. He tells kids that all the time. And I'm abundantly blessed. Next to being a father and a husband, the greatest joy and privilege of my life is representing the people of West Houston. It's something that I have shown again and again that I'm the right person, the right place at the right time to help this city. When it came to recovering from Hurricane Harvey, I demonstrated that something I've done for years, that is quietly work across the aisle in a bipartisan way to bring home the funding that we need to not only repair the damage from Harvey, but to build out and prepare for the next storm. There's enough money. I was able to bring home enough money to finish every federally authorized flood control project in Harris County. I've made sure over the years that I've been there not only for flood control, but also to make sure to protect the Houston oil and gas industry. I was proud to sponsor and pass legislation to repeal the oil export ban, to help unlock those shale formations in West Texas, to help unleash the genius of the engineers and geophysicists in Houston that have made it possible for America to become energy independent, a goal of mine for many, many years. I'm looking forward to continue to work to grow the U.S. economy and the Texas economy by protecting that great tax cut, making the individual tax cut permanent, working to continue to free up businesses and individuals from regulation. And by protecting that tax cut, we're allowing businesses to invest and grow. As Janice Chucker, who's here tonight, who owns Three Brothers Bakery, is finally able to grow her business because of that tax cut. To help neighbors and friends like Jennifer McKnight, who flooded in Harvey so badly, gives me great joy and satisfaction to know that I've made a difference in the life of my friends and neighbors in this extraordinary job that you've entrusted me with, that I remember every single day. What a privilege and an honor it is to be your representative. And I will always represent you with honor and integrity and consistency, and keep my word to you. To be a free market fiscal conservative, you can always count on.
Thank you. Tracy Fletcher will now deliver her closing statement. You also have 2 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this evening. Thank you to ABC 13 and to Univision and to U of H for hosting us. And thank you all for being here tonight and joining us in this important debate. Because this is the most important election of my lifetime. And for many of us, it's the most important election of our lifetimes. We are in a real crisis point in our country. Our confidence in our government is at an all-time low. People's rights are being rolled back. Civil rights, equal rights, voting rights. We need new leaders in Washington that we can trust, because we know that so many people have fought so hard and so long for progress. And we need to know that the people who are in Washington are continuing to do that work for us. And we need a new generation of leaders who are going to move us forward, not backward. I'm that leader for Texas's 7th Congressional District. I've lived in this district nearly all of my life, and I know it. I know the people who live here. I've had the privilege of representing them too. I've represented them in court as their lawyer. I've represented people from all walks of life, refinery inspectors to chief executives, and I've represented the companies that employ them, and I'm proud to have done that. I'm proud to have worked for them, Republicans and Democrats alike, to make sure that I'm helping them solve their problems. I've accomplished a lot for them. I'm pretty proud of my track record in the courtroom, but I'm ready to accomplish more, and I'm ready to accomplish a lot for all of us in Washington, because we face serious challenges, from our roads to our bios to our schools. And we need people who are going to do the job with the seriousness it requires, who are going to roll up their sleeves and do the hard work of governing, of listening, of advocating, and of working together across the aisle with people of both parties to try to find common sense solutions for all Americans. That's what we do here in Houston. We work to solve problems together, and that's what I'm ready to do in Washington, D.C.
We want to thank you, Mr. John Culberson, and also Ms. Fletcher, for participating in what has been a very informative debate. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
And before we go tonight, I have a reminder for you. The first day of early voting is tomorrow, October 22nd, and goes through November 2nd. And don't forget, Election Day is Tuesday, November 6th.
Thank you all for joining us, and have a good night. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. My hands are full now.